Ahoy, you salty sailors. Time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arrgh! Alright, so Ledges State Park near Boone, Iowa. It's a rainy day. We're just going to slow the usual pace way down. Enjoy a few plants and mushrooms. And take it easy for the most part. No matter what we do, it's still going to be a rainy day. So along these bluffs, we're looking for a plant that we've discussed in a previous video. And that is Aralia racemosa, American spikenard, the plant that's always out of reach. It does have an interesting perfume-like smell, and since it's a rare, somewhat difficult to find plant, it always arouses curiosity. This is a plant that is probably somewhat under duress by invasive honeysuckle. So it should be left alone for the most part. Here you can see the very beginning of what will develop into the raceme. This plant has not flowered yet. The raceme will eventually bear those flowers, and then those will develop into a small reddish colored berry. So here we can see, does it grow just right out of solid rock? How does it do that? And you can see here the nodes. The nodes are often somewhat swollen. And the stem, the main part of the stem, sometimes has that purplish color. There again, you can see the very beginnings of the raceme. So this is an edible mushroom, a pretty good edible. Lactifluus volumous, the voluminous latex milky. The thing that is unique about this mushroom, well, of course, aside from the copious latex that it produces, is that it rarely ever has any bugs, and I think that's, as the bug begins to try to chew into it, it gets swamped out by this sticky white latex, and you decide to move on somewhere else. So, in Iowa, the chanterelles, unless you pick them, when they're quite young, will very quickly become just completely destroyed by bugs. But the Lactifluus volumous, rarely disturbed by bugs. The latex, once it's dried a little bit, creates these brown stains. It has a somewhat fishy smell, and it creates these brown stains whenever it dries on. Iris alba, got a white oak of some kind. And below that, we've got a few small chanterelles. Now these, you'll notice that there isn't that much contrast between the color of the cap and the color of the stem. They're both shades of yellow. So we're going to call this one, and because it's the cap is about halfway unrolled and it's still quite small, so we're going to call this Cantharellus flavus. Whereas the somewhat larger chanterelles have quite a bit of contrast between the white color of the stem and the yellow color on the top of the cap. So we're going to call these Cantharellus phasmatus. Somewhat larger as well, somewhat larger and more substantial in terms of its context. Now here you can see the blunt, the false gills. So these are not true paper-thin blade-like gills. Rather, they are dull ridges or folds in the hymenium of the mushroom. Here's a closer look. So yeah, those are not paper-thin gills. They're just blunt folds in the hymenium of the mushroom. That's a key identifying factor for all chanterelles. So this plant, the common name is green dragon. This belongs to the arum family, the Aeraceae. This family contains tropical and subtropical plants like calla lilies, but you can also see here the spathe has dried out and turned brown, and the spadix has flowered, and it has produced those berries which are green now, but when they mature, they will turn bright red. Another plant in the Aroideae subfamily genus Ericema is the familiar jack in the pulpit. Now we all know in the spring that familiar spathe and spadix. In this case, you'll see the spathe has turned brown and dried out, and the spadix is producing that cluster of berries that will turn bright red later on in the season. So that's the Aeraceae, the arum family. And not to be confused, of course, with the Apiaceae, the carrot family. There's our old friend from a previous video, cow parsnip. That is one of the plants that the juice, if it gets on your skin and your skin is exposed to ultraviolet light before you can wash it off, it can produce a chemical burn. So that's cow parsnip family Apiaceae. So you'll recall earlier in the spring, we harvested a few wild leeks. And remember that I said then that one of the key identifying factors was that the plant does not have leaves and flowers at the same time. So here we can see the leaves have completely died away, a flowering stalk has emerged from the underground bulb, and it is producing flowers now with no leaves present. This plant is called motherwort, as we dip into the Lamiaceae, the mint family here. It does undergo quite a transformation. The leaves look like this in the spring. This plant is false motherwort. It likes damp areas and marshes. The flowers are borne, very small flowers are borne in rings that encircle the stem. Kind of smells like turpentine when crushed. That's an interesting member of the mint family. This is American germander. You can see the lanceolate leaves, they're serrated, but they have that kind of deeply set veination, which is a distinguishing characteristic of that species. Here we can see right next to it Monarda fistulosa, bee balm. You'll notice the leaves are also lanceolate and serrated, but they don't have that same deeply textured veins that the American germander does. And of course, Monarda fistulosa, not in bloom yet, and the raceme, the flowering part, is different between those two plants as well. Now this plant belongs to the order Lamiales, so the same order that the mint family is in, but a different family. This is the family Scrophulariaceae, the figworts. So it has that square stem, it has the lanceolate leaves, but as you can see, the flowers are quite different. This is hemp dogbane. The cannabinum in its name comes from the fact that it was once used to make rope, and it will also produce a milky latex. It's related to the milkweeds, but the cannabinum does not indicate that this plant contains cannabinoids. It is instead highly poisonous if ingested in any form. So we'll mosey on up the steps here, and sure enough, we've got an old stump with some Pseudoinonotus dryadius emerging here. It's one of those strange mushrooms that exudes those droplets of reddish fluid, especially in the younger stages. We've got the chinkapin oak. There's the developing acorn. Those acorns in the chinkapin oak are said to not have very many tannins and so forth, and can actually be eaten by people without parboiling and so forth. I've never tried it myself, don't know if that's true or not. And here we have American bladder nut. That's well, it's an interesting plant. We'll just leave it at that. The chinkapin oak does prefer the calcareous soils and slopes a lot of times. I don't know if that's true of the American bladder nut or not. But that's where I found it growing in this particular case. Well, there's a rainy day Iowa nature walk for you. Let's wrap this up and head on home.